Morning.
Governors.
We're going to go ahead and call the
Visit this.
February
Today.
28th, I guess, board meeting to order. We'll dispense with the roll call. Quorum is duly notified, or the quorum is duly noted. The media was duly notified. The first item on our agenda, because I understand Mr. Clark has to depart at 9, I'd like to, with the board's concurrence, move item number 7 to the beginning of the agenda, if that's okay with everyone. And with that, we'll go to the report of the funding committee.
Well, since the funding committee did not meet because we were going to swap times with y'all today, we do not have our report yet. But Mr. Clark, I think, is ready to talk to us about, and Sarah, about some items. So whichever one you want to go first.
Well, David, you go ahead. I think Jody's maybe got some handouts on some different scenarios as well. So between the two of y'all.
Let me go ahead and just do a quick flyover as far as the role that WAPI will play in this discussion. It has to do with consolidation or the potential consolidation of the police pension fund. By consolidation, we mean turning the administration and the assets of the pension fund over to the WAPI system to administer, which means making the monthly benefit payments, issuing 1099 tax forms at the end of each year, investing the assets, all record keeping that goes along with that. And then that means that the Board of Trustees would dissolve itself at that point and assign administration of those responsibilities to the WAPI Board of Trustees. Now, you all have previously completed consolidation evaluations on a couple of occasions, so you're the ones that have been on the board for a while are somewhat familiar with that process. What the board does is issues a payment to the WAPI actuary, not to ultimately we think of Jody's office, but in this case it would be the Retirement Systems Actuary, which is Gabriel Roeder Smith and Company, and the pension fund would then pay an actuarial fee, and I don't remember that number at the top of my head as far as, because it goes by the number of participants in the pension fund. Now it has a base of $750 plus it's $20 for each participant up to, I think it's 100, and then $10 for each participant over 100. We have a memo that covers that, but the fee is paid directly to the actuarial firm. Typically, in about 6 weeks, the valuation comes back, and then I do a cover letter and present the report back to the Board of Trustees. What the evaluation will do now, because of a change to the WAPI board adopted back at the December meeting, is it will show you costs for the employer or the city using a 25-year amortization to pay off the unfunded accrued liabilities, and then a 15-year amortization to pay off the unfunded accrued liabilities.
So it'll show you both.
It'll show both. And it will show both with and without a cost of living adjustment of 3% compound COLA. And so that way you'll have a series of comparisons. Show you the plan as it currently is, it's been infrastructure, 15-year, 25-year amortization, the plan with the 3% compound COLA, 15-year, 25-year amortization.
Would we have an option to give them a different COLA amount if we wanted to? And the only reason I ask is because in looking at some of the scenarios, let's say we decided we wanted to do a 2%. Could we tell them that? I know they may not be interested in that, but I'm just.
You could. We would have to figure out some additional ways to be able to bill back the city costs, because all the programming right now is structured with using a 3%. Because the WAPI plan has a 3% COLA built into it, and every local plan that does adopt a COLA on the way in or at some point after consolidation, they have always used a 3% COLA.
Is that mandated?
No, it's not mandated. Not for the local plan, it's not mandated. I would hope that, not for the ease of administration, because we can administer it, it's just, I would hope that for the long-term implications for the actual members themselves, that you guys would really try to lean more towards the 3% COLA if you could, just for the simple fact, I think that's going to really be, this is David talking now, I think it's going to be more commensurate with helping the members keep pace with the change in the CPI in the years ahead.
If you did it with a 25-year and say in 15 years, we found that we was very well off as a city. Can it be changed, like a house can be paid off early?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, the city always has that option at some point. If something changes, financially for the city, and says, look, we have, for whatever reason, we have this lump sum of money, we just want to go ahead and pay off the unfunded liability and remove that from our books, then absolutely you can do that as a city. The valuation will be valid once you complete the valuation, which we can accept the request beginning April 1st of this year. That allows the system time to close out the previous year, 2012 in this case, and it also allows the city time to be able to complete their annual financial report for the pension fund.
And that's due March 31st,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
it would have to be done subsequent to that,
Yes,
correct?
ma'am, that's correct. Yeah, because we would need that data. Yes, and then the valuation will be valid until the end of October of the same year, because then that allows, if you guys do proceed with consolidation, time to go ahead and use those same results when we kick off into the following year, which is supposed to be 2014. If we go beyond that October 31 deadline, then what happens is the plan will just need to put a new evaluation, at whatever point in the future that you want to make the process again.
David, what happens to, once if they do merge the lobby with COLA and the unfunded liability is paid off, what happens, where's the money go that was used, like the property tax, fines, forfeitures, et cetera? Can the city use that money for any reason, or?
No, wouldn't it still have to go towards the pension fund?
Yeah, it would still go towards, in this case, your police pension costs, which would be for your lobby members.
Where did those funds come from now?
We have the 1 mil property tax levy, and then there's also 10% of fines and fees. This is all state law, 10% of fines and fees. There's some other court costs, forfeitures,
Sale of goods.
yeah, different things.
Does any come out of general fund?
Yes, the sales tax that we've committed right now, the $500,000 a year.
So that would be then available for other things.
The sales tax number would probably be available for other things. The other things are restricted for pension. Like, we couldn't use that property tax money for anything other than pension. We would either have to continue to contribute it for pension, or we would have to take it off the books.
My point is that you can use that towards paying the new employees from 1983 above their cost of lobby, which now you're using out of the general fund to pay that. So the money is really just circumcising around. It's just moving around, and you actually have funds available to do what you want to out of the general fund. The money that you're paying us is going to pay the cost of the new employees. Right now you're paying out the general fund, so you want to do that. See what I mean?
It would probably reduce the increase, but yes.
Okay. Also, I've got a question. Would this be fire too, or just police?
So in this case here, we're only talking about police.
Okay.
If you wanted to do this for fire, we could certainly do that. That would just be a completely separate valuation and a completely separate discussion. Because we're talking about a different pool of assets and a different pool of people.
I have a couple of questions. One on the drop.
Let me just ask this: are you done with your presentation?
Yes, sir. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Okay. On the drop, that's administered differently, right? I mean, right now, our fund is using that kind of like a savings account, and monthly they're able to request withdrawals or things like that. But if it were to be merged, that would change, correct?
That is excellent. I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is absolutely true. Is that as we get closer towards that point where you decide that you do want to consolidate, you would definitely need to reach out to the drop participants and let them know that upon consolidation, they're going to either need to, if everybody's retired, so they're going to need to either take the drop monies out, they can annuitize it, meaning take it out of a monthly payment, they can take out a lump sum, annuitize the balance, they could roll the whole amount over to another investment vehicle if they choose to do so, but they won't be able to do periodic withdrawals from the plan, because LOPI does not administer drop that way.
And Jody, in fact, it would probably be helpful because we could see the numbers, or at least estimated numbers, if Jody hands out the schedule that he's got. But in some of the scenarios he had run, because I think in the early years of a 25-year amortization, the required contributions actually less than what we're bringing in, but in the later years it's much more than what we're bringing in. But we wouldn't have an option, like I said. I mean, the property tax, those fines and forfeitures, those things have to be contributed to the pension, right? The city couldn't just...
Right, they're supposed to be dedicated only for the retirement
Right.
costs. That's correct.
Okay, so we wouldn't have an option not to fund the full amount each year. We would have to,
Oh,
I mean,
that's
I don't mean the full amount, I mean the full amount that we collect towards the pension would have to go into the fund.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then on the liability side, the rules have changed effective 2014. The new GASB rules go into effect, and so we will have to reflect on the city's books the unfunded liability, and it'll actually be much more than is currently reported, because right now, well, actually, the unfunded liability will have to be the full value of all your future payments, including COLA, if you were to go with the COLA, less the assets in the fund that are current. I mean, because you're all retired, so we have to recognize 100% of that as a liability on our books at that time. It used to be when you merged with LOTFI, because it was administered by the state, as long as we were making that required contribution, we didn't have to show a liability. That completely changes. So we will have that big liability.
Ms. Adcock, that's what I referenced early on.
Gatsby report.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. That's correct.
See, and here on the front of the schedule where he's showing, this was the estimate right now, like
Okay.
right,
Just let Jody.
okay.
Is there another one? I guess there was 42.
No, I think that's it. I brought 10.
I'm sorry, there's none.
Yeah, there's a couple there. Yeah, let me start by saying that this is all based on the work we did for you last year, and these are the estimates if you had consolidated 1/1/13, which means it's different than what the actual number would be, but it gives you a very good idea as to how this would work. If and each chart and graph shows the outstanding liability balance, or the outstanding unfunded liability that's being paid off. And what I did is, if you do the 25-year amortization, and this is just the LOTFI required payment. I'm gonna get to the real amount of money in just 1 second. But if you pay just the LOTFI calculated payment, the second column you see the calculated amortization payment each year, and for reference you see your sources of income that you have more than enough to pay in the first several years. And then from the graph, then you can see that the liability actually would go up for several years, and you would actually not reduce the liability until year 14 or 15 at all. And that's so in the GASB discussion, if this was how things played out, the city's CAFR would still show that $77 million unfunded for another 15 years before it ever reduced at all. And I think that would likely be a concern, or should be a concern. You should be aware of that. City should.
Jody, does that gas year requirement, is that any different whether the plan remains locally administered or LOTFI administered?
Not anymore.
All right, I think the board needs to hear that.
Yeah.
Well, the difference is the COLA piece.
Right.
Yeah, and
that's
that's
a
with
big
that's with the 3% COLA.
So, if I may, let me ask this one. Why is that significant then, if it's going to reflect the same thing out of what?
Well, because it's not. Because right now, if you look at the back slide,
Last page.
yeah. I mean, well, and the back page, I think, shows the current liability, and I say current, the unfunded liability as of 1/1/13 is $52 million. You go to a 3% COLA, and it's $77 million. So the cost of the COLA is about $25 million. The net present value cost of the COLA is $25 million. So it adds $25 million to the liability. And then that liability doesn't go down for 15 years.
So, in effect, we're looking at 25 million difference, 52 million versus 77 million, whatever you call it, liability.
Additional unfunded liability
For just this one
for just the COLA.
So if you wanted to do the same thing for fire, you're gonna see, it's gonna,
And Jody, this is 2010 or 2011 data.
This is based on the end of 2011 data.
2011 data. Okay.
but as I was mentioning a minute ago, I think we should look past the first one and be looking at the second one, because minimum's not an option, right? Let's look at the second
Right.
slide. 'Cause
That just shows you, the first one shows you the general shape of what's going on. Now, in your case, you have the other sources of income, and you see on the list of numbers there, the outstanding liability, the projected sources of income. If you apply those projected sources of income, and that's the same projection that we did in the report for you last year. If you use those projected and reduce the liability, you see that the liability doesn't go up before it comes down. It creeps down for a few years before it really starts to come down. But you can see that those known sources of income reduce that liability in the first several years. You also see the last column of numbers that in about the 10th year, there would be the lot fee contribution, assuming all other assumptions are met and all of those good things, would still kick in, and you would still have additional city contributions necessary to pay for the 3% COLA.
This is over our 500,000 sales tax and all the other sources. This is what we
That's
needed
over all
over
the
and
other
above
sources that are currently available.
And so Jody, I'm looking at year 18 is when we get to about the 52.5 million. So it takes us about 18 years to get back to where we currently are, right?
Yes. For what the current liability is without a COLA.
Jody, does these numbers at all reflect, just as an example, the money which I'm going to guess is around $250,000 a year that we're currently paying in manager fees? Does it reflect any savings the city would experience from the administrative staff? Any of those things?
All that this reflects is that net you would earn what the lot fee assumed rate is. And the net, lot fee assumed rate is that 8% and 4% overall salary scale. I mean, it's based on that. It doesn't have a special adjustment for differences in fees and those things. It takes the lot fee assumption and says, if we go forward 25 years using their assumptions, here's what it will look like.
Got you. David, if you could tell me, does the LOPI consolidation study include any of those factors?
It does not. It simply looks at liabilities, assets, and the local plan and LOPI, and then produces a rate.
So I guess, Sarah, my question would be, don't we need, in order to get a true, accurate picture of the cost, need to somehow make adjustments, if it's nothing but internally as we review these reports, to allow for, because I mean, just as an example, $250,000 is substantial in terms of starting, or I would think so.
Well, and I would think really the only expenses that you could consider would be, like the investment manager fees. You're not paying any portion of admin cost right now. You're not paying any part of the admin office. So your legal fees, we've already decreased since we're using city staff as well. So really we're talking about the investment manager fee.
Last year it was $223,034. That was 2011. Is there any way like Ferris internally could we look at that and see these numbers here?
Well, but at any rate, I mean, it's not going to factor into either actuarial study. I mean, we could.
But I'm talking about on our end, we could look at it.
But I don't think that's, I really don't think that's the role for us. I mean, that number's going to fluctuate, and I don't see how we can take that and try to come up with a factor and how it impacts these numbers over here.
It's my understanding that a lot of people charges us a flat $300,000 for everybody. I think that's.
Well, then it goes up. Then
Well,
add 100,000 to the.
No, you're saying for the entire population.
No, now look, maybe I'm off here, but there actually would be no direct cost of management fees from LOPI when we consolidate. And look, I don't care too much how you cut it up. If it's going to cost the city $1 million, just for the sake of illustration, if it's going to cost the city $1 million a year, then how can you reasonably not say that if you say the city saves $250,000 in a related cost, that shouldn't be considered? That just, I mean, aren't we after in all fairness, aren't we after, the number that, reflects what the bottom number is additionally it's going to cost the city?
But is
But
the
that money,
value,
that money doesn't come out of it right now. I mean, that money's coming out of your fund.
Yeah, that's correct. It is coming out of the fund, but however, it's not factored in to the study which,
And so I would ask the two who have conduct these, why don't you include
that's
that?
good, very good point.
Well, you had the actuarial assumptions for the old plan, the local plan as it is now, which is at 5%, but that is a 5% net. That really says that what you earn gross is going to be 5% plus whatever your investment fees are. The same thing for the lot fee assumption. 8% is an 8% net. That, I mean, if you wanted to say another way you could express the lot fee assumption is that they are assuming that they earn in the long term 8.25% gross, and that they have 0.25% of investment.
so it actually is factored in.
So it's factored when you're talking about
That's
present
what-
values and liabilities, it's factored into
Yeah.
both.
That
But
does make sense.
but it is part of the investment assumption. It is not a separate expense that there's an assumption on. It is part of the investment
That was-
assumption.
that's the point I was trying to make.
But plus, as the asset value diminishes, the fee diminishes as well. I mean, it's not going to stay at exact 200 and some thousand every year either. As benefits are paid out, and the asset value decreases, the investment value decreases, the fee decreases as well.
Do these numbers reflect the population of the fund as people passed and everything? They're removed from the rolls and.
Yeah, those were all calculated into the initial present value. What these tables do is they take, going back to our previous report where we factored in everybody that was married and all those things and came up with present value of those liabilities. What these charts do is they say, here's what that estimated liability was. And if we got to pay it off in 25 years and we have these sources of income, and what would that look like? And that using the lot fee assumptions. And that's all it does. This is pretty simple compared to what we did last year. This just says those estimated present values from that last report, if we put them into a 25-year mortgage, except that our payment is our projected income sources that we did last year, then this is what the payoff would look like.
Jody, could you go in through your charts?
Okay, be happy to. Page 2 is with a 3% COLA, so it starts with that same 77 million liability as a starting point, but it uses the known sources of income, and you can see that those known sources of income, as they go through that process, you can see the picture at the size what the unfunded liability would be over the life of that 25 years. See how it goes down. You also see in the last column of numbers the projected shortfall, which would be the additional money the city would have to come up with starting in about year 10 to make the minimum lot fee payment. Because remember, we talked about this at length before, that the lot fee payment has that, since it is a amortization as a percent of payroll, it has that payroll, even though there's no payroll for this plan, but it has that 4% increase. It's like a 4% increase in mortgage every year. So using the actual projected source of income, that's what that is. The next ones are the exact same, except with different COLAs. So page 3 is the exact same thing with COLA. The starting liability is only 68 million instead of
16 million
and you see that there's not, over the life of this, since you're paying more than the required amount in the early years, that you never have a projected shortfall in that one. So the city currently has the sources of income without having to come up with new sources of income in the next few years to pay off the unfunded on this schedule. Okay,
It's still, the starting point is 16 million more, so the net present value estimate is 16 million more that the city is contributing, and of course there's interest and things like that too. But the reason I asked the question of David about whether we had an option of merging at a different COLA is you can see the projected shortfall goes to 0.
With a 2%.
with the 2%. And that's similar to the conclusion we came to last year in our report. The next page is the same thing except with a 1% COLA. You can see that because we're over, so to speak, over contributing in the early years, that goes down relatively quickly. It's got a lower starting point. It goes down faster. It's paid off at the end of year 17. So you can see how that would work with just a 1% COLA. And then if you consolidate it with the current benefits, no COLA or anything additional to what the plan currently does, the liability starting point is 52 million unfunded, which is about what it is. I mean, under the lot fee assumptions, not under the valuation assumptions, but under the lot fee assumptions, there'd be a liability of about 52 million. And with the current sources of income, you pay it off pretty quickly. You pay it off in 14 years, 13 years, as opposed to if you use the 25-year scale, it really doesn't matter because the current sources are always more than enough, and it pays it off in a 13, 14-year time frame.
I have a question. It may be a dumb question, but I keep thinking about the fact that you never want to amortize something over a longer period than the estimated useful life of the asset or the benefit. We're talking about people who are already retired, and I'm a little concerned about the length. That 25-year period is just a pretty long period, and a very simple thing I've said, and I know this is a little bit of an extreme example, but a person who makes $30,000 a year doesn't typically buy $1 million house. But if you make the amortization period long enough, well, they could. But they might be, that's the concern that I have, is that we're getting pretty far out there at 25 years.
Well, at the average age of 71 years old, I don't know how long. Looks to me like this mortality is going to change pretty big. I don't know if you factor that in or not. Another question I'd like to ask you is, what is the COLA that the new police and fire get, the Arkansas State Police gets, highway acres gets, teachers retirement gets? What COLA do they get %?
And the answer, you wouldn't have asked the question. 3% for all of them. Yeah, they're all at a flat 3% per year. Teachers is 3% simple instead of compound is the only difference.
Does anyone receive the 2% that you know of?
In where?
In any of the
State system.
local?
None of our state systems. All the state systems are 3%. The only difference is teachers is a 3% simple, which is the equivalent of about 2.25, 2.5 per year.
I got a question. David, does any of the ones that's come in so far after this amortization, do they come in with the 2%?
No, anybody that has consolidated, if they've offered a COLA, it's always been at 3%. Not every plan that has consolidated, though, has provided a COLA, just because the employer has not wanted to accept that additional liability attached with the COLA.
And David, have any plans merged under the 25 years?
Not yet. No, this would be, we're going into the very first year where the 25-year amortization period would be allowed, because, let me back up here once, is that years ago, like pre-08, all the plans used, it's like a lot longer, but
1908?
Yeah, 1908, yeah.
20,000.
It is that it was a 30-year open amortization period is what everybody was factored in under consolidation. In other words, it is followed by lobby, it's a 30-year open amortization period. 2008 and up until this past year, all the new consolidations were closed using a 15-year closed amortization period. And then at the request of the city of Benton, at this past December's lobby board meeting, Benton wanted to be able to amortize their police pension fund liability because of the change in the insurance premium tax. They actually had an erosion of premium tax funding for their plan. And so they're trying to help take the pressure off their current city budget by having a longer amortization period. Now, the part B to this, though, that I think is really important, is their benefit structure is much, much different. They have 100% of final pay benefit for their plan, so their costs are significantly different as far as how the premium tax or insurance premium tax money, that formula works.
Yeah, explain if you would, exactly what that means. They have 100% of pay.
Right, instead of half salary, or the Little Rock Police Pension Fund has had a series of benefit increases over the years, some dollar amounts. But what happens with the plan I'm talking about with Ben is that whenever a member goes into retirement, everybody's retired there, is that if they made, $40,000 a year, that's their benefit. That they continue with $40,000 in retirement because it's 100% of their benefit of their final pay.
Do they have a COLA too?
With 147 plans, I don't remember off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
well, I guess the thing I was wondering about is I understand, going out 25 years when you're trying, when you're trying to refund your liability because you've had a decrease in income. I guess the concern I have is expanding and increasing benefits at the same time. I'm just a little worried about that.
David, I got a question for you on Jonesboro. They're one of the recent ones that consolidated with Lobby. Did they consolidate with a COLA?
Good point. Yeah, they did. Yes.
What percent COLA was
3%. I think. Yes.
A couple of things, David, that you just mentioned that, and if I understood you correctly, was that prior to 08 that, and if it was, what year was it that they used?
The 30-year open.
Yeah, my question is, what year did they move from 30-year amortization, not 25 like it's currently being proposed, but 5 additional years, and use 30 years across the board for all funds that consolidated?
That was pre-2008.
Okay, so prior to 08, let's make sure I understand it correct, prior to 08, all amortization for lot consolidations was at 30 years.
30-year open.
30-year open, not closed.
Correct.
And then in 08 forward, it went to 15 years until 2013, and then it goes from 20 to not 30, but 25.
Well, not for 15. It's either 15.
15.
Because we'll still give the locations the options to either use a 15-year closed or 25-year closed. We'll calculate both costs and let the location choose which one they want to use.
And David, didn't the pension accounting rules changed at that time too, and there was a maximum that you could amortize, and that's why it changed. I mean,
True.
The laws
and
changed
and
the rules changed.
That brings up another thought, is that very early on in Lofty's life cycle, it's like, mid-80s, is that at that time, plans used a 40-year open amortization period. So there are actually local pension funds that consolidated with Lofty that at the time were using a 40-year open
And with
amortization
open
period.
means every year it's
Just
over 40
reset,
years again.
yeah.
So you could be paying benefits for
Wow.
people that are long gone.
And
that have
those locations, they have a
Right.
significant unfunded liability because of that amortization.
But that brings up a comment, Sarah, that you made. I don't know that I've got Norman's record on that one, but that was the, when you look at these projections, it projects out the life of the fund to be how many years? An additional 60, 70, 50? How many years?
We project in what we did last time. We projected out over the next 50 years, and there was very little left after 50 years. But
I guess my question would be, if the life of the fund's 50 years, isn't a 25-year amortization rather reasonable?
it's no.
Okay.
My opinion is it's too long.
Why? If the life
Because-
of the plan's 50 and you amortize it over,
And we went through this when I did my report, that I didn't think that more than 15 or 20 years was as long as you'd amortize it out. Because, well, it's similar to what Sarah's comment was. You are amortizing longer than there are still people alive after 50 years, but the average useful life or the average life of the remaining liability is significantly shorter than that. You'd be paying you'd be paying millions of dollars to pay off a liability when you only had 2 people alive,
David,
way out at the end.
what would your reaction to that be? I mean,
Well, and Jody and I actually had, kind of a friendly disagreement on this, is that my position is that I do not think that a 25-year amortization, closed amortization is too long for these pension funds. And that's why I actually requested the Lofty Board approve this request at the December meeting. That was based on staff's request that they actually authorized us to be able to use both a 15-year and 25-year. Now, granted, this was all the genesis of the City of Benton's request, but it's because of the fact that you guys have a 4 to 5 decade life expectancy for this plan. And while Jody is completely correct, as far as the value of the benefit payments to be made towards that tail end are going to be very, very small, especially when you compare to where we're at today. But by the time we reach there, if everything works correctly, all the assumptions are met, after 25 years, the city will have satisfied the unfunded accrued liability payments for the local plan, and then just have the ongoing lofty cost. So even though we proceed past year 25, everything is supposed to be fully funded at that point, still making benefit payments to the retirees or survivors in that case, but the city's only paying the ongoing lofty cost at that point, assuming all the actual assumptions are met.
See, the disconnect that we have is that in the financial world, and as far as bond raters and everybody else is concerned, a pension liability should be 100% funded at the date of retirement. So we've got where we're right now less than 40% funded.
Yeah,
It gets a whole lot worse than that as we go along before it ever gets back to 40%. Even.
Jody, I'd like to ask you a question on your report on page 1 on the 3% COLA on the right column, the projected shortfall.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like it'll be about 10 years for the city to really have to kick in any money, additional funds. If the city was able to come up with another $250,000 out of the sales tax it had, would these numbers on the right column starting after 10 years, would that drop quite a bit on there for you?
Well, they would change and they would be less. But without running it through, it'd be hard to know. It would change, and clearly that the shortfall would be less if you put in more money early.
But it would be a significant amount of change with it, or would it be a little bit of change, no change, you think? It'd be change, Jody said.
It would change and it would go down. Just like you can look at page 1 and page 2 and see that when the city puts in all of its sources of income over the first several years, that the shortfall gets pushed off several years and goes down.
But Jody, that's a good example, because the difference between page 1 and page 2, we're making 1.5 million more in the first year. Mm-hmm. Because in the first page, you're assuming we're only contributing 4.8 million
right.
instead of the full 6.3.
Correct.
So, when you look at the change, it pushed it from year 7 to year 9 that we needed additional money, but it's still, millions.
Right.
David, are you and Jody saying on page, I guess it's page 3, that at this time we could go into the lofty system and it would be 0?
On page 3, that's what the 2% COLA. Yes, ma'am.
With 15 years.
That's what Jody's showing.
Projected to not need any additional city funds to pay off the unfunded, other than what's already available.
Based on a 25 year.
Based on a 25-year amortization.
Oh, sir, you made one comment. I know that you're correct in what you said, that characterizes what you said fairly. In my words, basically, a pension fund should be fully funded at all times. It should start off fully funded. It should be fully funded each year.
And that, just like the fact that you used to be able to have a 30-year rolling amortization versus a 15-year closed, the laws have changed and the rules have changed. And that's one of the changes, is that it's supposed to be fully funded at the date of retirement. Historically, that was not the case for these types of plans.
Well, and that is my point in the Pew report. I think indicated on the last page, the city has fully funded WAPI each year, and that is an accurate statement, but it is worth mentioning that there's a legal mandate for the city to do so, and that unfortunately, it goes back to what you just said, and unfortunately, not just Little Rock, but virtually none of the cities actually done that from the conception 70 years ago when they began, nor have they done it ever since. And that's the reason that we're in the situation we are now, is because there wasn't a legal mandate for cities to do it, therefore they didn't do it, and therefore gross amount of funding.
You understand what you're talking about. 1983 on the back of the Q report, it says they fully funded it 100%, everyone 83 and above.
Right, that's a lot.
That's a lot. Now,
What that means is we paid 100% of the amount that they requested us to pay. It doesn't mean we paid 100% of the liability, because the liability, I think that, you're 76% funded or something in that neighborhood.
right, I understand that. But what do you pay towards the recommended actuary recommendations for the old funds? Now, he recommends that we pay, the city pays, but the city doesn't pay, do they?
It's disclosed in the valuation report.
Right,
And it's in
and
the
part of that,
capital.
it's got a 5-year closed, or a
Yeah, but
5-year
yes,
amortization.
it does. And it's in the it's disclosed in the valuation report, and it ends up in the CAFR, but I did not bring that with me, I'm
But
sorry.
you do recommend that the city pay this amount under the old funds to keep them sound.
I think this year's was in the neighborhood of 14 to 16
Yeah,
million
what the
dollars.
valuation,
Our
what the
annual
valuation
contribution.
recommends is significantly more than what's being put in.
I see.
Ms. Adcock, what kind of bring this down to kind of a real quick flyover as far as what was just being discussed, is that under LAFI is that every participating employer has to make the actuarially required contribution. So if the actuary said you have to pay 10% of payroll, they pay 10% of payroll. Under the local plans, it's changed over the years, but where we're currently at is that there's a 6% member contribution under most plans, 4% for some, but all the other 6% for the paid plans. The employer simply has to match that 6% contribution by statute, even though the actually required contribution rate may be 15, 16, 20% of payroll. They don't have to make that by law, and most often they don't. They simply just fund what the law requires, and that's what Mr. Hanson was talking about, was that over decades of time there's been a significant underfunding of the employer contribution side. So, and that does play a huge part of why we're here in the position we are today, and that's why I was talking earlier before we started about why I have to be really careful whenever I review a peer report and how much credibility I put into it, because if we don't look at all those factors that the actual required contribution hasn't been made for decades of time, well, it really shouldn't be a surprise that the plan is underfunded when that happens.
Was there someplace in this Pew report, and I've read it previously, but I don't see it here, that addressed potentially a 3% cost of living as
I did talk about COLAs in it.
thought I had seen that.
Yeah, it's in there.
And I think it referenced that in some instances,
I was just about Sarah, second to last page, I believe.
Huh?
Second to last page.
Second, yeah, I'm on the second to the last page. I'm looking, is it the second?
okay, if an annual 3% COLA could be implemented, cost of living increases are designed to keep inflation from eroding retirees' pension income, however they can grow. I thought I seen I thought I seen somewhere that it indicated that sometimes 3%, the cost of living is not 3%, or am I?
Well, and what that means is that, yes, that's the case. That's one of the downfalls, they say, with a fixed COLA, is that there will be years where cost of living is not 3%, but you get the 3% benefit anyway. There could be years when the cost of living is 4% or 5%, so there's variations there, but that's the issue.
Well,
And I think over a long period of time, the average is somewhere between 2 and 3. Is that correct? Over
Over
the,
the last 30 years, it's been about 2 3/4,
Two.
2.8, 2.75.
Yeah, I think since inception, since like 1913, hasn't it been like over, just over like 3.3%?
Yeah, it's been just a little over 3%.
Since right
Really,
before we
really.
started, yeah.
so I mean, you know, there's years when inflation was 13%. There's years when it was, you know, like when there was no
The 3 is kind of the average.
between.
Over the very long term,
Long
like,
term,
but if
yeah.
you look at the near term, like Jody was
Yeah,
saying.
you look at the last 20 or 30 years, is a hair under 3. If you look at, since they started keeping that record, it's a little over 3. So it's right in that neighborhood, long-term CPI.
But I think a fair point to make too is if you look forward rather than in the rearview mirror, and you look at a national debt of $16 to $17 trillion, quantitative easing having occurred 3 times in recent years and probably about to occur again, spending not coming down but going up. Isn't it from a kind of financial perspective that it's mainly a question of how much inflation or when rather than not being inflation? Is that fair, Larry?
Yes, sir.
But they also said that 5 years ago, so.
That's correct.
And the debt has continued to go up. I mean, it has to be paid at some point.
I understand, but that, I mean, when you, the way that the question was, I just think that, you know, that is, that's fair.
Hey, Jody, just for, shouldn't we all tear off the front page though, because the minimum isn't an option really?
The minimum is not really an option. The only other thing I'll say about the first page is that the first page is the other reason that I said, since you made me answer how I really felt. The first page is why I said, the other reason why I said that a 25-year is really too long, because the liability goes up. And when you have a decreasing liability, your unfunded liability shouldn't go up. And in this, with a 25-year, it goes up for the first few years.
Well, most, I mean, to me, you've got to kind of reduce it down to something that I can understand, and that's comparing it to the way we approach finances in most Americans' day-to-day lives. And clearly, it always costs more money to finance your new home at 30 years than 15, but then 80% of the people do that because it makes it more affordable on the payment. And they expect to be living 30 years. So our plan, 50 years, expect to be living 50 years, at least some of us.
Well, I mean, this is an interesting discussion. I don't know if it gets us anywhere, but you're right. But also a reasonable expectation of a person that doesn't do this is that you would at least pay the interest on the unfunded liability. And with a 25-year amortization, you don't even pay the interest on the unfunded.
But it's paid off in 25 years, where right now, when's it going to be paid off right now? It's $50 million underfunded. It's grown.
Okay, right now is that last page
In about 15 years.
in 13 years.
That's if, well, let me tell you this. The fund's about 70 years old and hasn't ever been paid off yet. It's just gone up. So we are to believe that in 13 years, if we don't do anything, then it's going to be paid off in 13 years. But then, if you want to look at historically and look in the rearview mirror, go back 60 years and look, you see what's happened. And it wasn't by accident.
Well,
that it's
no, but
happened.
you've had everybody retire since then, so you got more benefits being paid out. That was the
A
issue.
lot of people,
Lee,
David, when does this take effect, the lottery that we can ask for the 25-year study?
It's effective now.
I mean, now?
Yes,
I thought it
sir.
was in April.
Well,
Well,
you have to wait.
yeah, we have to wait to run the valuation
They can't do it.
beginning April 1, but it's in place now to be able to offer that.
But we could go ahead and approve a lottery study 25 years today and make it effective.
but I think what he said is that they show you both scenarios, not just the 25.
That is
They show you 15, they show you I think they show you 4 scenarios, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah, 15-year, 25-year, as the plan currently is, 15-year, 25-year, as plan is with 3% compound COLA.
And without.
Yeah. Well,
That's
Right,
the
okay,
first thing.
okay,
Yes,
all right.
that's correct.
Instead of having one without, could there be one with two and one with three?
Yeah, that would be, we could do that. That would be I'd have to go back to the actuaries, and I'm glad to do that. If you wanted to do that and find out what the valuation fee would be, because it'll be something different than the fee amount I quoted earlier. Would you like me to go ahead and just verify that for you, so you at least know what the valuation fee is?
I think so.
Well, if you wanna pay it, it's gonna be paid, it'll be the same today as it will be whenever. Fee's a fee, we wanna include it.
Well, but, and that's for us to discuss. David's gotta go to another meeting, so we don't need to hold him up. But the reason that I asked Jody to show it is because when he showed nothing in 3, there was a big additional amount that we would have to pay for the 3. So I was trying to figure out where it
But the,
comes out with 0 and it was at
it's
2.
my understanding that Lafayette uses a different actuary, that true.
Right.
That is correct, yeah, we use it.
Well, plus everything's changed, because we've
Everything's
got
changed.
another year behind our
Yeah.
belt.
Ms. Hancock, are you wanting, it is 2%.
I'd like to know what the fee would be different if we looked at 2% and 3%.
Okay, absolutely.
Do,
I'll email that to Sarah, and she can circle back.
do we need to make a motion to go ahead and approve
We've got between now and the end of March, really. to
Yeah,
do
because
it.
you have your next meeting coming up anyway, where you can, because, we
And
won't
I-
be able to accept it, until April 1.
Okay. I'll put it on the agenda for next meeting, if you can get the figures first.
Yes, sir, yeah, I'll definitely get the valuation fee, and I'll send it on over to Sarah.
Would you be able to make the funding committee meeting next month?
Sure.
If we could do that?
Absolutely.
8:30.
Yeah, just let's,
Neat.
let's coordinate, yes,
Explain the fees.
Let's do it at 8, because when we do it at 8:30, then, the staff needs to get in to set stuff up and everything. I think all of us can get up 30 minutes earlier.
You wanna do 8 o'clock? Sounds good to me.
So I have one question, on your table here, shows projected sources of income.
Yes, sir.
At 6,373,000.
Yes, sir.
That changes over the years.
Yes, sir.
And also, why would you not pay that full amount of source of income on the front end? The first 9 years, you're underpaying.
We are paying, that's what, not now on the front page, we marked it on the
Yeah, the second
where it's all
page,
current.
second page
It's
is
when
taking
you're
that
paying the
full amount into account.
Well, it shows here, your
Yeah.
projected source of income is 6,373,000, and your payment's 4,853,000.
The 4,853,000 is what the amortization would require, but the fact that you're using all current, it's assuming we're paying the full 6.3.
Let me ask you, is your question, I was thinking is, instead of it being 0 for the first 8 years, why isn't that spread out?
Why wouldn't you not pay the full amount of the projected source of income the first 8 years? You are?
You are.
And the
On
reason-
page 2, on page 2, the amount of payment is the column that says projected sources of income. And the graph, it says using all known sources.
All current.
So it's, page 2 uses all current sources that we know
Okay,
about.
so you're paying that much.
Right.
You're paying that much. You're paying every penny you're taking in.
Okay.
And then in 10 years, you start paying even more.
In other words, if we only paid the amount that the payments, then these numbers would be a lot higher.
Right.
And start earlier.
Right.
Okay, anything else for Mr. Clark? Roger?
Mr. Chairman, before David leaves, if he has time, there's at least 1 or 2 pieces of proposed legislations that might affect your plan, and I might ask him to comment on those from his perspective as the director of
I know it's 9 o'clock, David. Do you have?
I've got a couple of flex minutes here that you, yes.
41 and 152.
Yeah, Senate Bill 41, which is, it's actually a PRB requested piece of legislation. It makes a technical change in a section of code regarding guarantee fund, which is, now has gone away. And then also opens up the eligibility class for the additional allocation. And if you remember, your fund received additional allocation this last year in June 2012 because the city actually made extra contributions into the pension fund to achieve what's called the additional allocation, which is 10% of the actuarial cost on base benefits. And so the city brought in more contributions to the plan, which the plan needed, and then the state provided more premium tax to the form of the new product, or new fund rather, I should say, called additional allocation. Because of the 80% contribution threshold, which is a requirement in current law, Senate Bill 41 seeks to actually change that to where it's either 80% of the required contribution or have 1 mil in place. If that goes into effect, which we don't know if it will or not, the PRB is going to visit this again at the March 5th meeting, is that could cause an erosion of all the plans that currently receive additional allocation, because there would be more plans now eligible to meet the additional allocation threshold. So roughly, Jody has calculated that about 80% of what you previously received would likely be available for your additional allocation. One thing is that we really want to consider is that, and actually one of the other PRB members brought this up recently, was that something that we hadn't thought about is that by having the 1 mil in place, is that it could cause some locations, if they have a mill in place, not to even try to reach that 80% contribution threshold like they did this last year. So it could have an unintended consequence by causing less monies to come into a pension fund because a location has a 1 mil in place. So we're going backwards, in other words. And so, we're going to request that the PRB pull back that section, of the bill, have it pulled out. Now, I will tell you that was actually put in at the request of one of the mayoral representatives on the PRB. So we'll see how that discussion goes. But that's, our recommendation as staff is going to be that we actually pull that out, and we'll see where the discussion goes.
Well, and I had planned to attend the PRB meeting as well, and to really, I don't know if testify is the right word, but to talk about my opposition to that, because I do think that cities like Little Rock, who stepped up and made additional contributions, and we did it even before the sales tax passed. We made sure that we met that 80% threshold so that we would qualify for that additional contribution. And so we contributed an extra $150,000 or so that first year, and then committed the sales tax dollars to make sure that we were contributing. So I think we've got skin in the game. We've stepped up. We're making sure we're making that contribution, and I don't think it's fair to see that erode. This legislation that created that additional allocation put everybody on a level playing field. We've stepped up, and I think that it should continue in that way.
David, other than that particular language in the bill, is there any other language in the bill that is even needed?
In section 1 there is, yes, and that has to do with pointing back to the former guarantee fund section. So we would definitely want to run that portion of the bill.
Well, the reason I was asking is whether or not you could just ask that the sponsor withdraw the bill, or in this case, you're probably going to have to ask that he simply amend it.
Correct, that's right.
And the PRB board would need to direct you, since it really came from you, to ask him to at least amend this section out.
That's right.
Correct?
And this bill actually came to the PRB, and so we had it drafted at their request.
Well, it will be interesting to see how that plays out at the PRB, like you said. And in effect, I don't blame the mayor, but in effect, the mayor wants to get all the funding he can and pay no more into the fund than he absolutely has to.
That's right.
From the city perspective.
Was that Russellville?
No, it was actually Camden. And then Senate Bill 152. Senate Bill 152 was actually, I believe, at the request of this board, and that has to do with increasing the police supplement. That should have sat closer to the door, I think. Is that actually it said that that our position is that we oppose this proposed piece of legislation for the simple fact that it does a lot of what I just described a moment ago, in that it goes after the same source of funding that would be available for additional allocation. It would probably help to remember that how the formula works is that after everything is carved out of the premium tax, $4 million has to go back to the state. We can't breach the $4 million. It's just not possible. It's in the law. Well, last year there was roughly $118,000 left over. So in other words, there was $4,118,000. This year, we already know that $118,000 will be consumed by other locations that will simply have evolved into eligibility for additional allocation. And likely, it's possible that even without this piece of legislation, that we may have to do a proration where we do a bit of a prorating or lowering the amount of additional allocation for all the available plans if there's not enough premium tax. Because the way the formula works is additional allocation is the first source of funding that is prorated in order to make sure that everybody else receives all the funding that's required in the formula and that we maintain that $4 million floor. So I've asked the PRB to take a position to oppose Senate Bill 152, and I've not received any negative feedback from the board on that, and the sponsor has actually pulled it off the calendar.
Well, and again, I had a feeling that probably came from you guys. I didn't know for sure, but I had that marked on my opposed as well, because that's one of the pieces, that additional allocation that got us out of projected insolvency status, and I didn't want to, again, erode for the same reasons as SB 41.
And can I ask a question on that? Who introduced that?
Who introduced, you talking about which legislator?
Well, who led the effort to get that introduced? Was that you?
Yes, sir. And that was at the request of this board.
But did the whole board vote on that?
Yes.
When was that?
Oh, I don't recall. Back in probably December, maybe.
November, December.
I'd like to, I mean,
at this point, the bill isn't going forward unless you all want it to go forward, and I don't necessarily think you do. I would like to make one comment. I'm sorry, I was interrupting, Mr. Chair.
well, it puts us in if that happened, we'll go back and I'd like to look at the minutes, but obviously it doesn't make us look good when we're out.
Well, until a bill is drafted, you really have no way of knowing what the impact is, and that's the purpose of drafting one, and you can't get the bill costed until you file the bill. That's Jody's job for the committee. So until all that process occurs, you don't have the numbers to know whether it's good or bad. And in this case, the numbers are negative. They could have been positive, but they're negative. So it's not inappropriate for you to ask, if you choose to withdraw the thing, and we can ask the sponsor to do that.
Roger, I'm not keeping up here, I don't think. What was it that we passed?
Increase the increase the regular supplement from $50 or whatever we could afford. And Roger said at the time that it may not be any money there to do that we went ahead and asked to do that in case there was some money there.
Right.
But there obviously is not.
There's no money there.
That's how we came about that.
So if you want to take formal action to ask that we approach the sponsor to withdraw the bill, certainly you can do that, and I'll ask her to do so.
I'll make a motion to withdraw the bill.
It's been motioned and probably second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
The intent was that
I agree, I agree.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make one other comment as David is leaving. Good news and bad news. In the past, before we put Act 979, I believe, into place, we always had surplus funds. And I shouldn't say surplus, but there was always money that didn't get distributed that ended up going back to state general revenues in the end. And I guess the good news is that we're not leaving any money on the table anymore. Every dollar, other than that $4 million, is going into the funding for all the plans, and so we're not leaving any money to just be left over and go back, which that's positive.
All right, thank you.
And you all have anything else you want to hear from me this morning or not?
Do you have any other good news?
You're going to report on the
Are you having fun?
concealed carry for the, not concealed carry, the publication.
I meant to bring copies of that. You want me to wait for the chair, or you don't? Go ahead on.
Go ahead.
All right.
Because he's got to leave at 10 too, so we need to keep
No, I
moving.
need to be in the Capitol in about 30 minutes. But the Law Enforcement Training Standards Board has created new regulations on qualifications for really everybody, including retirees. And those rules have to go through what's referred to as the Rules Committee, which will happen sometime in the spring or early summer for final approval. It's just kind of a rubber stamp thing. But those new rules, which I meant to bring you a copy of, will let you qualify from 15 yards as opposed to in the past. So you will not have to be any further away than 15 yards from the target.
Is this for active duty and retired or just retired?
The language in the new rules allow each department to establish their own standards for active duty. So it's 15 yards as a minimum. They may put in place whatever they choose to or whatever is appropriate for their department. But on the retirees, you are 15 yards.
Oh,
And you're not active duty, in case you were confused.
Can you email those rules to?
I don't have them in email form, but I can make sure there's a copy that gets to you, and you can.
If you
The thing
give
is,
us
they
one, we
haven't
can
those-
scan
those-
it and email it.
What?
If you'll give us one, we can scan it and
Yeah.
email it.
It's just that the rules haven't been actually codified yet. It's just the recommended rules from law enforcement training standards. One other area that shouldn't really impact any of you at all is retirees, I don't think. There's a bill out there for open carry. It failed in committee, and law enforcement spoke against the bill because, and I guess the easiest example as to what's wrong with open carry is if a law enforcement officer is called to the scene of an incident, he shows up and half the people that are standing around all have a gun on their hip. It's a little hard for them to focus on who the bad guy is, and it totally changes the complexion of the incident. It could make it very, very dangerous. So I think the general feeling is that type of change in the law makes it more difficult for law enforcement, puts them even more at risk than they already are. The legislature seems a whole lot more worried about protecting people's rights where weapons are concerned than they are about protecting officers, which is a little troubling to me. But as far as retirement issues, I don't think I will tell you there's always the threat somebody may try to do something that would be damaging to you, and we're certainly watching for that. But hopefully right now that won't get any.
We appreciate your work on this retiree bill. Lee might even be able to see the target at 15 yards.
That's about to hear maybe you, right?
Yeah, it's about that far.
Well, he's a bigger target than you.
See that?
Could they make the target double the size that it is?
Well, I know that was an issue that one of your previous board members was adamant about, and there is some other language out there that has to do with allowing officers to never have to qualify for a concealed carry permit. You just automatically get one, and I guess that's fine. That's a concealed carry permit. That's not the same as what retired officers are allowed to do. That's a different thing. And state police weighed in on that issue, and I think kind of helped the guy craft the bill a little bit better than it originally was.
So there's a bill out there to allow officers to get a permanent concealed carry permit?
Yeah.
With no fee?
I don't know about the fee. I think we could maybe modify that there would be no fee if you were retired in a plan that didn't have a coat. If you don't need me any further, I'll see you all. And then Larry can have your attention.
Okay. Why don't we go back up to the report from the Board of Financial Consultants.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the January report before you, we'll talk about, given this long agenda, maybe be brief. Good numbers tend to cause for brief reports, but as you can see from the January 31st, 2013 numbers, the first column month to date, January, up 2.67%. Obviously a very robust January and kind of picking up some of the momentum that we gained in 2012. If you recall, in the late hours of 2012 during the fiscal cliff situation, one of the primary concerns for investors was the changing of the tax structure for the dividend tax. It was at 15%. Current law was set to expire, pushing it near 40%. Estimates throughout the street were kind of varied. Some thought it would go the full gamut, if you will, up to 40%. Others thought it would probably be 30%. There were some mid-20s. Actually came in right at 20%. So that's considered a win for the street and for the investment community. So you had a really big push in January as investors kind of got into the first trading days of the month. Now, I took some precautionary measures of selling out some of the high dividend or high yielding securities in advance of implied tax changes, and now to kind of rotate back into that sector. So you really had some positive momentum, specifically in the oil and gas sector, where you tend to have corporations that pay large dividends, and even in the MLP space, which you own, I believe was up like 10% for the month of January. So a nice push of going back into a dividend yielding security, and it makes sense as you think about it. If you think that the fixed income right now, the market on the 10-year Treasury, this morning we're at a 189. We actually bumped 2% during the month of January. But for the S&P 500, you're getting about 2.2% right now on an average dividend yield. So, yesterday Chairman Bernanke was on the tape. Actually, the last 2 days, the Senate and the House committees, and the question was posed to him: are people taking undue risk to go out and achieve rates of return superior than what they can get in the risk-free rate? Of course, he said he did not think so, but it kind of begs the question that if you're not being compensated to stay in the risk-free rate, eventually, and now we're going on from 2008 to 2013, they're telling us they're not going to raise rates in 2015 on the short end, you do get some type of push for the investor sentiments to kind of rotate into equities, and on a relative value scale right now, equities are more attractive than fixed income. We've been talking about for a few years now that at some point in time, we believe rates will go up. And Ferris, you kind of highlighted some of this earlier when we were talking about the deficit and other situations. The bull market run that you've had in the fixed income instruments, specifically the risk-free, at some point will come to an end. And when that does, fixed income investments are going to have the potential to lose money. And we've talked about low duration for a while, and that's kind of been our buzzword. And so we have taken some changes inside the portfolio this month of making sure that we are on that lower duration, and duration is just lower interest rate sensitivity to fluctuations in yields. So fixed income is going to continue to be, we think, a challenge. We've said the last couple of years we didn't think you're going to be able to really knock out solid returns in fixed income. 2012, you knocked out solid returns in fixed income. You had another blow up in the geopolitical landscape, and there was another attractive move back off from the risk-off trade. We'll continue to watch that. Recently, Europeans are starting to get back on the forefront. If you recall, going back to the Olympics, they pushed enough chess pieces around where they were kind of not as connected as they once were, or there was a few stumbling blocks in front before having some type of danger with the euro. Now that they're going through elections and you're seeing candidates of opposing sides make their arguments on what they would do with any type of cuts for government spending and what they would do to try to resolve their deficits, you're seeing it kind of come back to the forefront and get a little shakier over there. Domestically, we still put out good numbers. Corporations are putting up nice numbers for earnings. GDP, albeit slow, and not very strong, it's still positive. It came out to this morning, as a matter of fact, for fourth quarter, and they revised the last GDP up as well. So you're still having this kind of shrug it slowly along GDP-wise, but you're having corporations, and if you think about it, they've really cut expenses the last several years, right? I mean, if they had an opportunity to lay off departments that necessarily weren't as profitable as they were, they in some cases cut things like the free coffee. They've kind of got to a very razor thin margin so that they can go out now and be able to make some profitability. Also, things that we're seeing besides GDP and corporate earnings, unemployment actually ticked down a little bit today off the latest number, but Chairman Bernanke again was asked, and if you recall, the latest round of quantitative easing is tied to an employment number. He acknowledges that to get to a 6.5% unemployment level is going to take years. So that's something that we'll continue to watch, and obviously going through some of the sequester events, that number may not get any easier. Trailing 12 months, solid number at 10 and just over 7/8, 10.87% versus the blended return of 8.2%. Again, you kind of look inside your index numbers there, and you see that it was very solid Wilshire 5000 for the last 12 months. Go down to the Dow Jones number, and you see there was only 9.72. So that the small cap space, mid cap space was attributing to a lot of the large returns that were gained through the indices, whereas the Dow Jones is kind of your 30 blue chip companies, only 9.72 versus the 16.6, or even the S&P, which is your 500 largest companies, at 1645. So it's kind of been a market to where you've got to do a little stock research for the investment managers and go out and some of the companies that were beat up, even going back to the third quarter of 2011, are still some of the ones that are putting up nice returns. And recall in 2012, we also had a soft second quarter. Since inception return for the steepest portion, 693 versus 527. And again, continuing to add where we are through February. February's been a good month, although we've had a couple pullbacks, some of as large as 200-point pullbacks. We really kind of got that back in a couple of days. If you want to jot down the number where you were as of February 27th close, it's almost month end, 3.14%. Go ahead and flip over to the pie chart, which is going to be your last page before you get to the tab 1. You see your equity allocation, second to last number on the page at 43.55%. Again, running at a good number. If you look inside the number, the 43.55, you see that we still have going up to your pie chart. Looking at 2 o'clock, you see growth at 1492 versus call it 11 o'clock on the pie chart value of 9.2. Values had a really solid run, primarily again to the fiscal cliff situation with dividend tax, subtle change. We've been talking about at some point in time, we'll probably get to where those are going to be a little more on parity with one another. And we're getting close to making some of that decision of maybe you take some of the money because growth's been a solid performer for you and look for an equity allocation there, or to build up to 43.55, take some money out of cash. If you look at 6 o'clock in your pie chart, your sector, your REITs, your oil and gas, those have performed very nicely so far in 2013. MLPs kind of went off to the races that I mentioned. Some of the managers there were up 10% for the month. Going around the pie chart, you see the other asset class, 1965. Of course, that's going to be your real estate, your mezz, and your Goldman. Still getting in the Goldman numbers to add into the January report. Should have that in for you next time. Had some updates with the mezzanine managers. We'll have those guys back in for a meeting probably in the spring. You want to at least let them get through their audit report so that they can come in with a full audit, which last year happened in April. So once they have that performed, we'll invite those managers back in. Tab 1s through, looks like 6, you're familiar with for now. These are your quarterly fact sheets. Your first one of tab 1 is actually your manager report. Now what I would highlight here in your fixed income section, look at halfway down your fixed income section, which is your first blue bar graph there. Goldman Sachs Strategic Income Fund up 1372 for the year. Now these are all 2012 numbers because we don't get this consolidated before in time for the year. A number of these come in late January. But 1372 for the year, I don't think that's achievable again. They caught a little bit of heat last year, which they won't apologize for because they did what the fund was supposed to do, which was run essentially a zero to negative duration. Well, you had in 2011 a 30% move in the treasury prices in the third quarter. That fund was not designed for that kind of move. That was an unprecedented move. So they actually had negative 2% for the year of 2011. We stuck with them, understood the convictions at Goldman, looked kind of behind the numbers on how they managed that process and still feel like the theory was sound. Held true to the allocation, and it was your largest performer for 2012. Other notes on that page would be PIMCO, total return, very solid year, 1035 versus underperforming in 2011. And JP Morgan Core Bond actually underperformed in 2012 while it outperformed in 2011. So all that said goes into why you have a diversified fixed income portfolio. And we've talked about that before, where we like to build a pyramid, have bottom-up and top-down managers, be unconstrained in some levels, have some inflation protection, and be able to take advantage of cyclical market cycles and fixed income. So very robust. All the managers do very different things, but otherwise contributed to a nice year in 2012. Other asset class, and we'll have the capital point, the Goldman Sachs filled in for you next. We should have had the Goldman Sachs, in there. It was actually negative about 1% for the year, right on top of the Dow Jones UBS Commodity Index. Real estate up solid year 2012, 1444. Going into your equity managers, you can see most of them performed extremely well versus the benchmarks. The Goldman Mid Cap Value right on top of its benchmark. The Fidelity Low Price versus the Russell 2000 Value outperformed. JP Morgan Large Cap, and got to put them on notice for underperforming the Russell 1000 Growth. Although the 3-year number, they provided alpha. We're kind of digging into the numbers of why they lagged so much in 2012. Have some calls with those portfolio managers. Mid-cap growth continues to be very solid. In fact, we don't allocate to an active manager mid-cap growth because it's very difficult to beat. So we stick with the index, which will return 1562 for the year. Beneath that, Columbia Small Cap. Small cap space was a very difficult year, 2012. Again, similar to 2011, you had a lot of the index contributors rally, which money managers tend to stay away from. And what I mean by that, you have dollar stocks. So, they go from $1 to $2. Well, the managers aren't going out and wanting to buy something as risky as a dollar stock, or in many cases under $1 stock, but it gets lumped into maybe the index. So that's why you have a little underperformance versus the index there. And then the sector, oil and gas, the REITs, good numbers on most of them. Maingate MLP 826. Your Vanguard REIT, 1767, great year in the REITs. We'll continue to watch that, especially when you've had such a run. But you continue to see a lot of money flow into the REITs, the Real Estate Investment Trust. The only lagging really number on the MLP space is Williams Pipeline Partners, down 1365 for the year. But look at the 3-year numbers. It's almost tops in class for the 3-year, 23.2. Watching Williams, they had some acquisitions. Some of the MLPs have gotten to where they've become a little bit more trendy now than they used to be. And so you see investors rotate out when something's had a really nice run. And why they do that is because once the price goes up, the dividend yield begins to decrease, right? The inverse relationship. So if there's some retail investors or some fund managers that are solely designed to take advantage of yield, once that MLP or that particular fund has had its run and then now it drags down their funds because the dividend yield's lower, then they'll cycle out of that by selling and go back into a fund or an MLP that may not have the best numbers behind it, but it's got a really good yield. So sometimes you got to watch for the fund managers kind of playing that game of just chasing the yield. International performed very well, given all the situations and the geopolitical event risk that's out into the market today. Performed extremely well. Emerging markets were really the tops indices for 2012, followed by international. Then you get into the U.S. domestics. So you see your Columbia Acorn International Equity up 21.21% versus an index of 18.84%. The rest of the tabs, that's going to be for your nightly reading. We provide those as customary, but good reports. We do have the Prudential report in, which is kind of a nice reading, as well as the Goldman Sachs Commodity Opportunity. If you want to see how they position themselves for the latest month, that would be the December report inside the fund. And then the rest of the tabs, tabs 3, tabs 4, tabs 5, tab 6, those are going to be the quarterly fact sheet that's provided on each one of your managers.
I'd like to make a couple of points that I think reiterate what Bo said and maybe add something to it. You guys look at your 1087 return versus your index 820. That's 267 basis points spread. That's the alpha that your portfolio earned over the index. That's a really strong number, right? We try to get 50 basis points to get 2.5. 260 is really unprecedented. It's because of the security selection, primarily because of your allocation to MLPs that Bo referenced a moment ago. As Bruce said a moment ago, we have been wrong on interest rates. We keep thinking rates are going to go higher. No, I just, listen, if I'm wrong, we're wrong. And that's where we are. We are going to be right someday because rates can't go below 0, I don't believe. We've not seen that except in Japan. And we did see it for 2 days in the Treasury, actually. But consumer confidence is improving. And if you don't believe that, go look at Walmart's earnings. Go look at the amount of money being spent on new vehicles, and the fact that you see housing improving. And that is a clear sign that the economy is improving. If you listen to J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, PIMCO, all of them are reporting that by the end of 2013, we're going to have positive numbers. Most of those positive numbers are really going to improve after in the second half of 2013. I'll just say a couple of things. Y'all, politics is driving our business. We can't make our fundamental economic decisions because of the decisions that are being made on tax law. If we don't know the rules, we can't operate within them, right? And so we're getting a lot of whipsaw. You see the market down 200 points because of Italy. You see it up 200 points the next day because we're not going to impose the fiscal constraints that were discussed at the end of the year. But when they decide to do it, it's going to be a down day or a down period. And so we're trying to manage within that process, and that offers some real challenges. Lastly, I'll tell you that not this group. It would have been very easy to go to cash or fixed income in the fourth quarter of 12 because it's so uncomfortable. Right? We did not do that. We maintained the integrity of our allocation. As a matter of fact, as Bo referenced, when we saw that it went to 20% as opposed to 40% on the dividend rate, we actually committed assets. So I think that's the kind of nimbleness, frankly, that you get here that you can't get in a large plan. All right? And that's how you're able to kind of add value to a plan that really has got some pretty serious restrictions by virtue of the payout structure. All right? I'll also tell you, lastly, that investors are fleeing from bond funds because this has been the first quarter that investors in bond funds lost money. They think if I can lose money in bonds, or if I'm only going to make 1 or 2%, I'd rather own equities. I'd rather own dividend-paying stocks. And so people are pulling money and going to equities. That's what Bernanke addressed. Or people take an unusual risk because they can't get interest rates. Well, let me ask you, if you're retired and you thought you're going to get 5% because that was always kind of the bottom number in your mind, and now rates are at 1%, and we know that milk costs more, we know gasoline's costing more, inflation's alive and real, just hasn't been fully realized in the marketplace. They are taking risks because they have to survive. So I'll tell you, I'm really pleased with the numbers. I'm not patting ourselves on the back. I'm giving you guys credit for the numbers, but really strong numbers for the trailing 12. It's going to get a little bit bumpy here for the next 6 months. We do think the end of 13 is going to be a strong year.
We had some really good returns. Thanks, very large part to you all. You had indicated, just one question, you basically indicated that consumer confidence is improving.
Yes, sir.
And the financial outlook, I think, paraphrasing it, for the markets through year end is improving. Have any of the basic fundamentals improved for consumers to really have more confidence?
No. And I tell you, the reason earnings look better is because companies are leaner, they've laid people off. They got more cash on their balance sheets, and they think if any kind of consumer uptick is going to stress their current capacity to meet that demand, and that's going to improve earnings. So everybody's downsized to the point that they were prepared for the worst, and so anything better than that fairness is going to be a reflection of the positive. Bo referenced that unemployment is still bad. They reported this morning that Moody says that if we don't raise taxes and meet the deficit cuts that we're committed to, there's another possible downgrade by Moody's on our national debt. So no fears, we're not out of the woods. There are lots of reasons to think that these consumers, they don't have a lot to be happy about, but we are looking, there are pockets of improvement, and most of those improvements are because our companies had low expectations.
Well, I guess what I had asked, at least in my mind, was exactly that. I mean, if consumers thinks or wants things to be good, they start buying, and there's perception they are. But I think the point of it is the basic fundamentals have not improved. In fact, they look gloomier than ever.
It's so interesting. In December, sales were slow. Christmas sales were actually kind of off because they were looking at the physical. They were scared by the news media. What'd you say?
I said we can attest to that.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. Good point. And then things have started to pick up, and so it is a lot of psychological. There's an economic and a psychological part to this, and we're not immune to it. When you get all bad information, it's hard to find something good. It was really hard to find something good in November, right? And in December, had you gotten out of the market, you guys would have said, "Oh my gosh, we missed it."
Yeah.
can I add something to, if you're looking for a silver lining there, we're at 1950s levels for consumer debt and leverage. And so while consumer spending on discretionary items, 2012 is actually up from 2011, but it is down. The good sign is there's less debt carrying per individual right now on their credit cards. And so you have seen some deleveraging taking place. So at some point in time, they're going to go out there and say, well, I don't have to pay my credit card bills, are not as high as they were. I'm going to go out now and buy something new. And the reason that's good is you see banks do the same thing, right? Banks were heavily leveraged before 2008. Now you see a much leaner bank. You should have some profitability depending on what rules and regulations may come out. And same with corporations. The most leveraged component is the government now, where it has, you go back to the tech bubble, it was corporations were highly leveled. You go into the 08, it was the banks that were highly leveled. You go into where we are now, it's the government that's highly leveled.
You guys, good numbers. You got to enjoy that when you have a good number. 13 is going to be an interesting year for us. The next 6 months are going to be particularly interesting. We expect good results for you. And thanks for having us today.
Thank you.
Actually, we enjoyed hearing the other commentary this morning on the plan too, because it gives us a perspective of what you guys are faced with. Thank you.
I asked Roger to come back in. He's conferring the hall with Kim, and there's one issue I think we need to take some action on that he can work on is something the board has dealt with on surviving benefits for survivors. So Roger, could you?
Yes, sir. Just thought that I left. I'm sorry to come back. Hate to disappoint you. I know you've had Kim working on an issue as to how you pay survivor benefits. There was legislation passed in 2007 that said that if there was no surviving spouse, it would be paid to the officer's estate. And there's some question, and we also changed the word funeral expense to death benefit in 2007. The same year, another bill passed shortly after this one that used funeral benefit instead of death benefit. So this was never codified, actually. So what I can attempt to do, because it's way too late to file any bills, is to maybe utilize a title, a Shell bill, or even Miss Elliott's bill, if the title's germane enough to fix this. And I'm assuming what you want me to do, and a motion you would need to make, would be to set up benefits for survivors according to the policy you want, which I think is, if there is no surviving benefit, it would be paid to the estate of let me rephrase that. If there's no surviving benefit, it would be paid to the deceased officer's designated beneficiary or estate.
Are you talking strictly about
Death
the
benefit.
$6,500?
Yes, sir. Is that how you want this? You want it to go to a designated beneficiary? That's what you've talked about, I think, right? Does it require any language on your part that has to be a relative? It could be anybody.
It can be a funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what we talked.
Most of the time it is. I will do my best if you will direct me to do so.
Is there a motion to that effect?
What we're talking about, going to a funeral home?
The language allowing.
You to pick.
Yeah.
You designate.
So
moved. Oh, second.
Okay, it's moved to properly second.
You may,
either way.
you first.
He's first, I'm second.
Do you want me to draft or you want to get some?
Let me see what I can come up with. Kim, I may visit with you about it. But I'll confer with you as to what we have for language.
Okay.
So did you vote?
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries.
All right. And on the other bill, I did act, I guess, a little prematurely. You all didn't actually take action in January. It had been tabled until January. I wasn't at the January meeting. However, in my defense, in order to get you a cost on the bill, the only way I can get cost is to have a bill drafted and actually have it filed in order to get it back to you. And there's such a deadline on filing that I didn't have much choice but to do it in January. So if I erred, I apologize for that. And anyway, thank you all, and maybe we can get this fixed as well.
With the board's concurrence, I've asked Jim Bradshaw to be here, and he's been up here twice now. Could we go to item 10 so we can answer those questions? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Jim,
Don't have anything.
Good morning. Good morning, morning, Jim. How you doing, man? Sorry. Love what you done.
So, Jim, item 10 on our agenda, two items. One, members who carry city health insurance, members carry over dental and optical when Medicare eligible that the board wanted to address. So, I think, Lee, you've been one that's kind of wanted this to be on the agenda. So, if you'd like to ask Mr. Bradshaw anything you'd like.
Yes, I was concerned about the retirees' health insurance being so high. Whether you have a wife or you have 4 or 5 kids when you retire. It approached now, I think it was close to $800 a month for a spouse and an employee. Even though the city pays 75% of the employee, which employees around $99 a month for health insurance. But by adding the spouse on there, it brings it close to $800, which is the average pension is around $2,000 a month for police, and 800 cash after taxes taken out. It's pretty half of the pension almost. And I was wondering why it's so high for just a spouse, and why there isn't a different tier like the state police has. I think the state police has several tiers where they have employee, spouse, you have children, whatever.
We have looked at using a different set of tiers in the past, and it really made much less difference than you would expect. In fact, I was a little surprised at the difference. It's been several years ago since we really looked at it, so I can't recall the exact numbers. But it really did not make a huge impact to set up, the employee and spouse, employee children, employee spouse and children kind of tiers. The percentage difference was very, very small.
I noticed when you go to like the employee, it gets 65 and goes on the federal system. The wife does go down to a single carrier, so to speak, or single carrier. Why is that?
Because if there is just a single dependent, we saw that we could make it less expensive for the retiring family, and the health carriers have agreed to let us do that, so that they see it as a single individual, and of course the retiree or the spouse of the retiree continues to pay that full amount, which there's no 75% subsidy for a spouse or a dependent carries over.
So I guess with 75%, the city would pay if the employee goes away, so it's kind of reverted over to the single spouse.
Yes.
I see. I understand.
Jim, have you all done any sort of study regarding the impact that probably not having any sort of tier system in place is negatively impacting the rates, in that you have younger active officers that have children that opt out because they can go somewhere and get insurance on their children much cheaper, and then even some active or retired that opts out, whose spouses are healthy, that opts out because they can get insurance much cheaper than the city, while it's leaving those in the higher risk categories and running up the cost. I was just wondering if there's been any numbers done to see what impact that's had over the years.
I haven't seen any specific numbers on that issue.
I know we have had some employees, and probably more in the non-uniform group than anywhere else, who have been eligible to get their kids on the state Our Kids program,
Right.
Which was less expensive, or have a spouse covered through some other employment, things like that, that have chosen to go that way as opposed to leaving here. But I haven't even heard any anecdotal kind of things about that specific question that you asked. I can ask our consultants over at Regions if they've seen any studies or have any research in that area, but I have not seen anything, even the national publications that come across my desk.
Jim, let me ask a question too. The active employees, they can opt in and opt out, right? One time a year.
Of what?
Insurance, they can get out.
The employee cannot opt out,
No,
but for dependent coverage, there are
No,
certain
the
qualifying, for dependents, there are some qualifying events that are spelled out in federal law, change of family status, new dependent, loss of dependent, things of that nature. They can change at any time. Otherwise, they have to wait until open enrollment and make the change.
That's my point. They can wait till open enrollment to get out. Then the next open enrollment, they can get back in. Dependent coverage.
Yes.
Is that the same as for retirees?
Yes.
It is?
And in fact, there's a bill in the legislature now. I know it's gone through the Joint Retirement Committee, and I think it's passed one house, that would allow a retiree who elects not to get into a program immediately upon retirement because of some other coverage to come back at a later date with a qualifying event or an open enrollment, and then re-enroll in an employer's retiree program.
Now, open enrollment, is that the annual?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So
Let's just say a spouse had gotten, a retired spouse, got out of the city policy, city insurance program, and next open enrollment, they wanted to get back in. Is that allowed?
Mm-hmm.
It is.
We have allowed that on occasions.
Okay.
I did get a call, and that's interesting. You said that. I wasn't aware of that. I got a call a week or so ago from a retired member, retired several years ago, basically wanted to know, he did not elect to take his insurance coverage with him, and he asked if he would have an opportunity. He said, I think I know the answer to this, but I wanted to ask. So,
under our current policy, he could not. But if the bill that's pending in the legislature now should pass, then with a qualifying event or an open enrollment, up until reaching Medicare eligibility, then he could.
is that on state level or federal? The legislation?
It's state level.
State level.
What's the bill, do you know?
I don't remember the number right now, but it's one I've been tracking. It's on my list there. I believe it's a House bill, but I know it did get a due pass at the joint retirement.
I would like to know how many retirees we have on the city's insurance. How many of them have just spouse and how many have families? Not coverage, because you've always said that they have to have complete coverage, family and spouse.
Yeah.
But how many just has a spouse over the child?
We wouldn't have that data, would we?
I don't have that particular question. I do, there are 257 retirees who are on the coverage, and of that group, 38 have dependent coverage. So 219 are retiree only, 38 have
Dependent coverage.
dependent coverage.
But we don't know if they have children or if it's just spouses.
No, ma'am.
And the policy's the same either way.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Moore, could we look at that? Because I would think only out of 38 that the majority would probably just be spouse only.
Yeah,
If they-
he's gonna, we'll look at it.
Because if
We'll
they
do
can
some
get their
additional
children
research.
on our kids, it might be a big benefit to them.
Granted, I can name you 2 people in the HR department who are different, but rarely do retirees still have
These
the
officers
children.
wear out faster.
Yeah. Yeah. So it could be more in that police and fire ranks that would have dependent children still eligible.
Well, and aren't most of the retirees that are on the city's plan police and fire anyway, because our non-uniform don't retire until they're Medicare eligible, pretty much.
In general, that's the rule. There are a number of non-uniform people who are on the coverage as well.
If you could get that information for us by next month.
Okay, I'll get to work on it. See what we can provide.
Jim, on the B members' ability to carry over of dental and optical after they become Medicaid eligible, I believe the thinking on that was that they would pay for it just to have the ability to stay on the dental or optical plan, that it probably wouldn't negatively affect the rate.
It probably would not have a significant impact on the rate. However, there are a couple pieces of that. Most of the people who would be covered by police or fire pension have never been eligible for our optical plan anyway. It's not available to the union eligible police officers and firefighters because it's subject of negotiation and they have never negotiated it in. So
the dental is definitely the biggest piece.
Dental is a bigger piece, and several things on that. Delta Dental, for those that have already reached age 65 and gone off the coverage, Delta Dental will not allow us to bring them back. We questioned that, and they said, no, once coverage is lapsed, we will not allow you to bring them back. Now, there is a plan available through Delta Dental that will cover both dental and optical. That is pretty close to the same total cost of what would be available through the city's program. Plus, once for the city's program itself, the city has to pay an administrator. There's a setup fee and then a monthly charge for billing and collecting the premiums on those. So when the total cost is considered, increases the cost of the city, but total cost is, I think, more than the program available through Delta Dental. And it's allowed on an individual basis and even past age 69.
So when you say it's allowed on an individual basis, do you mean you don't have to be part of the city
You don't
to
have
get
to
it?
be part of
Okay.
any group. You can go directly to Delta Dental and have this coverage.
Is the coverage about, you say the cost is about the same, is the coverage about the same?
Yes. I got a couple of copies of their brochure on it. Got one so I can come apart. But it's basically the same coverage that we have under the base city policy for dental. No cost for cleanings and exams, 80% coverage after a small deductible, and then 50% coverage on major work such as caps and crowns and so forth.
That's what this is.
Actually,
Yeah, that's in a nutshell the city's basic plan, and I think it's virtually identical to this. And on the optical, I don't recall exactly what theirs provides, but I think it calls for an annual exam and reduced costs on glasses and contacts.
So am I hearing you correctly to be able to pass on that even though when a member becomes Medicaid eligible and they are no longer, that the city plan is no longer available to them, that Delta Dental does have a plan at about the same cost or less and basically the same coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Plus optical.
Yeah, and they
Plus
have,
optical.
yeah, and they have, I baseline and an enhanced program on both sides, both dental and optical. So you can buy up to a richer plan. But those are both described.
Could we, could someone, if we could include that, we already do, well, I guess we don't do a mailing to all members. But I was thinking if we could include this information in.
When we would do a mailing to all the members is when we send out their annual statements.
Yeah, or
That's
most
crops.
already been mailed.
You talking about crop statements?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of members on that. So-
But couldn't James put it on the webpage?
Well, they could. That's about half the members that have web access. About half the members. So we still would reach on. But I was thinking,
Everybody that retires from the city, we provide them that information as they come through for termination clearance. So they get that information. Police, fire, non-uniform, everybody. Whether they
Yeah,
elect
right.
the city's coverage or go to Cobra, whatever they do, we always provide them with that information.
good deal.
Did that put in the mailing of the minutes to the people that don't have web access?
I'm gonna try to get this in the minutes of what he's talking about.
Yeah. And then we can catch the rest of them on
On the website.
And, would it be where, I mean, since you're over the insurance, or HR, would it be possible for you to do something very brief as a cover, to sort of introduce and cover the fact that the cost is fairly consistent, maybe less, as well as the coverage?
Okay, I can put together just short 2 or 3 liner, and I'll do an email on city manager, and I'm sure he's got all the connections then from there to forward it as need be. We can print it, whatever the pleasure is.
And could you include a little short line or two in there about the law that's passed in the legislature that allows what we were talking about a while ago about the dependents and the retirees?
Okay. Let me wait till that's passed the other house and wait on the governor. I wouldn't want to wait to anyone.
You wouldn't want to go ahead
Then
and.
it falls through.
Okay.
This might help get it passed.
Any other questions, Jim?
On their 38, on their application, what they have listed if they just have a spouse's name or if they have children's names?
That they would, we would have to go back and do a little research.
Since there's only 38, I would appreciate if you check how many is just spouses and how many have families. Thank you.
I can do.
All right, thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
I don't have to.
Thanks for sitting in.
Appreciate it, thank you.
I don't have to leave at 10 now, so why don't we take a little 5-minute break?
Okay.
I do need to leave about 11:30.
Okay.
Oh. Hold on, I saw you slipping. So that's why when you look
on the highest person that's getting, and then the lowest person and the average person.
Okay.
So that
we can do that.
Kim and all her papers.
I know.
Okay.
Oh, that's your trailer?
Yeah, I'll be a really fish this year.
Okay. Well, stop by and see.
Yeah, stop by to see.
Yeah.
It's a picture of the seal.
It is.
Called Rocket Sessions.
I think you were telling us that you were gonna do that, but I hadn't seen it yet. That looks good.
Thank you, thank you.
What are you doing?
This is your trailer.
Really?
And that's a shot of the skyline of Little Rock that I have right around the trailer.
Isn't that? What do you sell?
Everything. River
Since
Fest.
I got that trademark out of it, I was expecting my little check at Riverfest.
we do burgers and bratwurst and fries and funnel cakes and fried Snickers and fried Twinkies. Fried
Do you give people a percentage?
Yes, ma'am. As a matter of fact, all the police had to feed them free. Like we just did a deal in El Dorado, Willie Nelson concert, and somehow the word got out that I fed the officers free.
They were all over.
I bet you I 45 officers. I said, I know all these guys don't do it. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it from all the way to
Give them a 50% discount.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you gotta cover your costs.
Thank you.
See if we can get you to come to that.
Oh, yes, when is this coming up?
Okay, so did you get the ones you wanted?
Yeah, I found it. That one that y'all booked my book yesterday, I couldn't understand. What is,
Okay.
public health?
There's that chart that tells you all
They
the
didn't give me
Which-
that.
oh,
All I had was
okay.
a pie chart, and I got them to speak, and I looked at that pie chart, and
Well,
I
I didn't even know you'd ask for it, and Lori called me into her office yesterday, and she said, "Where is these?"
this said public health, this said leisure something
She
or
had
other,
her.
and I stood here and looked,
There's
and I
a
thought,
chart beside it that gives you all the line items that go into it. Well, sorry about that.
and I got up there, and I looked at that thing and thought, oh boy, because I got me, I started to do something, and I thought,
So you get your insurance.
anyway,
Anyway.
I can't find
Yeah, I got
public
it
records,
next
I
week,
can't
too.
find public records.
And they were probably in leisure. Parks and Rec was probably in
That was
leisure.
Supposed to be here soon.
But
She's
the
hiding
public
out in her
health
office.
and something else, didn't have anything to do with public health.
Yeah, I hope so.
Public health,
Well, but Public Works is more infrastructure and things like that, so I don't know.
but it wasn't even on there. And there was 8 different things, and there was only 7 pieces of the pie.
I'll show you the chart that goes with it, and it may be that one slice was very small. Well,
Well, the only thing I figured was accounting something down the bottom, the very bottom,
We still got another
was
hour
count
and
the
a
bottom
half.
of the slice as a slice.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I had a pie at your house, I don't want only the crust.
you don't want only the crust?
No.
I make good crust.
But I'm gonna have them send
Do you
these
want
over
to
there.
go pull my budget document, my 2000, it's either on my desk or on my shelf, the budget document, not the capital.
Well, good.
See, that's what he's gonna ask.
I've got some loose cheese. How are grandbabies? My grandbabies are awesome. Thank you for asking.
Is one starting to walk? The oldest one's?
Jaden's running.
Oh.
He's 18 months. Sophia is taking like 7 steps, and she'll lean into them, you know. So she's like, you know, but she's close. Her birthday was last week. She was a year old last Wednesday.
Mine's just starting to figure out she can get on her knees. I'm like, oh, I don't have much longer before she's
Well,
mobile.
we've had to move things off the shelves and put her stuff on.
It's just,
It actually was kind of a technical.
We'll reconvene, and I guess the next item is approval of January meeting minutes. Is there a motion?
I'll make motion to approve January minutes.
Second.
We move probably second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Kim?
I gave everyone a handout. Looks like this has a little chart at the top, and that little chart is my my attempt to make modifications to a PDF. But this is trying to correct the language in our quadro regarding payments to the alternative payee after their death. So what's in the box is what I'm recommending the new language would be, and then we would delete out the language that's marked through with red.
So, can we look over this and maybe table it to the next meeting? Is there a rush or?
No, I don't think so. We don't have any other quadros pending except this one, and I've approved it under this old form since we haven't adopted anything new. So I don't think we have a rush for adopting a new one.
Okay, so we're going to table that for our next meeting.
B, I think it's just a carryover from last month's agenda, but that's already been resolved. That we've noted that in the procedure manual.
Could we get electronically board members get an updated? All I have is the old one. I guess this is for the administrative office.
The policy.
Yes.
You want the policy procedure manual?
Revised electronic copy
Okay.
of the policy, so we will, at least electronic copy, so we'll have.
Okay. I'll ask Kathy. I'm not sure what if she has it electronically, but I'm sure she should scan it.
She had sent it.
Okay. Okay.
Before.
Okay.
If we could we please leave this on the agenda? So
Yes.
Okay.
I'll be both of them. I'll make note of them, make sure they.
Okay.
I've reviewed the Zakreski Quadro, and I believe it is substantially in compliance with our model. I don't have any concerns if this board wants to approve it. If you want to look at it, you can.
Is the language taken care of? And we've talked about this briefly before in regard to if something happens to the member, the alternate payee receiving the full portion.
As I said, I reviewed this one in accordance with the policy we have adopted now with the language of the quadro that we used. And so it has the language that the alternate, the same language that we've had all along. But you have the policy in place that will be interpreted on all of them to that the benefits will cease on the death of the alternate payee.
So that language is in the quadro, or is it not?
No, the same language that we've approved all along is what's in the quadro. But your policy that you've adopted prior to this says that language will be interpreted to mean that the alternate payee would not her benefits would cease upon her death, and it would revert back to the member, would cover this.
Yes, but my question is regarding if the member predeceases the alternate payee. It's
Oh, the
one
member,
or two
oh,
of
yeah.
these quadros.
Oh, okay, if the member predeceases, oh, yeah, that's covered. Yeah, that's
Okay.
in there like, it's in there 3 times. If the member predeceases the alternate payee, yes, the benefits cease, yeah, that's in there.
Okay, I'll make a motion then, on the recommendation of the attorney to approve the Crescent Quadro. Or my quadro.
I'll say,
It's been moved and probably second to approve the quadro that's before us.
Do you have copies?
Of the quadro? Yeah, sure.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And D,
D is the, resolution that went to the full board that,
right, that's on our agenda for Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay.
Yeah. So the board should act, there were a few questions, but I think I answered.
Are there any issues or any problems anticipated?
do we want to do this on the agenda next month and report to the members?
Yes.
That's fine.
And once it's approved by the city board, have we not approved it as a board?
Right, but then it still has to get the third test, which I think is to go to the PRB and have them approve that we meet the actuarial rules.
I think they've already looked at that.
Okay, okay.
I believe. I'll double check, but I put in the resolution that already approved it,
Okay,
so
okay.
I'm pretty sure we have.
Yeah, I
have
remember
an
having
opinion
to
on that.
talk to him about it, and then, I think, coming around, but it wasn't.
So how soon can they get their bottom line?
There's no limitation on it.
Well, is there like an emergency clause or some period?
Well,
of
it's a
time where it
resolution
can-
though, so once the board
Okay.
acts, it becomes the,
Okay,
It would be, I guess, immediately, wouldn't it, and until,
That needs to be reported.
as long as they're qualifying survivor at the time of the member's death. Then it would-
okay. Anything else?
I have one question for Kim. If we check on it, maybe you may know the answer now, but check on it, bring it back next month. It's been asked to me, my members ask you, if a person has money in drop, is that protected like a pension is, as far as lawsuits against a pension or lawsuits against a drop? Is that protected just like the pension is?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, as long as it stays in our drop. Now, once it is rolled out into a separate IRA, I don't know about that. But I know as far as our state law, that it would be protected the same, except, of course, the statutes that allow quadros.
Sure.
Okay, so the pension and drop as well as the monthly pension is protected from garnishment.
Right.
So, Judge.
Right. And I actually had to look that up for an attorney who was trying to figure out how to garnish our pensions. And if you guys need that for your members, I can provide you a copy of that statute. Would you like it? Okay, I'll bring it to you next meeting.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. You put it on the website.
Okay.
Through with 6.
With that, I think you guys are finished with me, so if you want to move on. Can you believe it?
just have to go look and see if Kathy's got it in there. I don't know if she's mailed it in. Kathy gives all that. So I looked at all the other. Right. I mean, I don't know that we have, which is.
No, it's wearing me out.
Okay, so are we done with 10?
Yes.
All right, Sarah.
Okay, and I apologize because I think at your December meeting I was on vacation, and in January we had stomach virus, so we've got 3 reports that I have to do. So go to tab 8. Yes. Looks like they've got the individual stuff.
She
or
did
8D.
your,
8 or 13D.
Sarah, she put the financials separate there in the back because, she printed them before you had time to review them, so we could get the packet done.
All right, so they're not in the tab. It's your thing is paper clipped. If you'll pull your paper clip off, you'll get my financial report. Okay, so the first one is the November, and at that time you had $43,763,260 in assets. And if you flip the page to your income statement, the big news was the property tax deposit came in, and that was $1,389,196, which brought you to an annual total as of the end of November of $3.6 million.
Where we at?
I'm on the November report.
Second page. The second page, okay.
The property tax is on line 4.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay. So that was the big thing in November. Benefit payments for the month were $608,714, or expenditures, including benefits, $608,714. Drop benefits paid out that month were $66,350 for total disbursements before earnings of $783,934. And actually that number is revenue minus disbursements before investment earnings. And then your net investment earnings in the month of November were $179,764. So you had net income for the month of $963,698, but a year-to-date loss of $637,583. So that was November. Turn the page and you'll see December. As of December, the asset value that increased just a little bit was $43,601,452. Got a drop balance of $20,241,252. You turn the page to the income statement, you'll see from this point forward your property tax receipts are just very little. It's like excess commissions, the final year-end homestead and things that come in. So year-to-date property taxes are now $3.6 million. I want to point out line 3, which was the city sales tax contribution, and if you look in the year-to-date, you'll see the fund received its $500,000 contribution. The benefits and expenditures for the month were $600,029. Drop benefits paid out during the month were $75,679. So year-to-date through the end of December, a little over $4 million in drop payments were taken out of the fund, $4,079,030. The earnings were net investment earnings were $410,044 for the month. Year to date, $4.2 million. The net loss for the month was $161,808, and year to date, the fund lost right at about $800,000. We are working on your PRB reports, and so there may be a little bit of tweaking to these numbers, but I expect this to be very close to where we should be for the end of December once we get everything reconciled. And then finally, you've got a separate attachment for your January report. And with the January report, I was just noticing that our numbers are about 6,000 different than Stevens, and they sent us the information really early in the month, and so I was looking at it in detail, and it looks like what they had provided us for Prudential on line 10, the $4,034,000, what must have been an estimate, because what they presented today was $4,027,785, and then the other number that differed from Stevens' report was the accrued interest on line 42, and they're showing 35,941, and the report they sent us earlier in the month was 23,571. So we will adjust those numbers to tie to their report, but like I said, the grand total was only about 6,000 different from what they said. So the January drop balance was 20,140,660. The fair market value of the assets was 44,084,647. And as you turn the page, again, at the first of the year, property tax receipts are really the residual for the previous year. The bills for 2012 to be collected in 2013 haven't even gone out yet. You see the first month of the city sales tax contribution, 41,667, benefit payments, and your expenses, $603,987 for a net loss of $487,543. There was an additional $103,511 in drop benefits paid out during the month. But as Stevens reported, we had a great January. Investment income was $1,074,249. So as of the end of January, the fund had increased in value by $483,195. Now I think the non-benefit expenses are behind a tab, and is that at 8A. So here is your non-benefit expense report. Nothing unusual. Just your payment to your lobbyist and your regular monthly fees for a total of $2,000. And on Dean Garrett, you'll see we did receive another $150. So her balance is $40,085, and that concludes the 3 months of financial reports.
Approve the 3 months financial report.
Moving properly seconded to include 3 months of financial reports. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
The next item we have is, let's see, is that behind 8B? Adding, or, I thought we were adding.
Well, I can go ahead off of that to remove Walter Simpson from the pension rolls, who passed away on February 5th, and to approve the death benefit amount of $6,500, as well as to approve the widow pension application of Ms. Betty Simpson in the monthly amount of $39.99.51.
I second. Voted probably second. Handle those 3 actions.
As a note, we are waiting still on the death certificate and a copy of Ms. Simpson's social security number. So we really have to have those before we pay. We did talk to Ferris and Ms. Simpson and told her that we would get everything started, and she has promised to get that in here before we pay her in March.
Actually, I was supposed to have picked it up this morning on the way.
Oh, really? Well, okay.
We should have done that. Okay.
And to extend our sympathy, our condolences.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed? Carries. Mr. Arnold?
We're at about 18,500 hits. Website's going pretty good. Anybody has anything you need me to add? I know we're going to add the insurance information. If I can get that from Mr. Bradshaw. Any other pertinent information, just send it to me by email or just drop me a line and I'll try to get it out there for you.
And I like the health stuff.
Yeah, because almost members, we need to understand something. In order to live longer, to get to where we need to be on this pension, we need to take care of ourselves. A lot of members need that information.
Okay. On item 11, Kim just needs that to be tabled on RFP process for the attorney to next month. And then B, have we figured out anything on that one?
I'm sorry because with being out and then sick and now legislature, I haven't done anything on that either. So on that, are we just looking at when it's time to do it again, or are we wanting to go back out to bid? It is time, right?
I think it is. I mean, there was really just a.
But I thought we decided it was a 2-year review. That
Yeah,
we would just say we were gonna review it, and if we determined we wanted to extend it for another 2 years, and I might be wrong. I do a lot of these things, but I thought that's what we agreed on.
Yeah, I don't believe there is a closed date on the agreement.
But one of the things that, do we have a contract? I mean, I was assuming after we went through that process, we had some type of engagement letter or something.
We were supposed to, but I don't think we could find one.
All we had is what I gave you a copy of that last time, where Stevens actually sent it to us, and they had just initialed and dated that basically that we had extended it, but it wasn't a new.
And there was a lower basis point, I think.
Right, they had lowered it a little bit.
So we need, if we want to next month pass a motion that says we want to engage them for another 2 years, that's fine. But once we do that, we then need a document.
Okay.
So do you want to just put that on the?
I'll just table it for next month and we'll check if we could get a document from them, show them what their fees are.
Well,
contract.
okay.
Look at, maybe review.
Well, do we want to ask them to, give us
Submit a proposal for
a
the next 2
proposal on the
years.
fees for the next 2 years?
If they could do that, we'd look at it over. Let's just leave it on the agenda. Bring it up.
Of course, we'll probably consolidate well before the 2 years.
We were hoping anyway.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I want you to ask this. All right. Fund member comments. I don't see we have any additional members today. Other business update on the death benefit form.
Well, we were gonna mail those out, but then whenever we were talking with Kim about the legislation, since I think we need to wait to see
That's what Roger
on
said.
Roger
Right.
before.
I agree. And then we need to approve the 2013 election schedule. I think positions 1, 3, and 5 are up. Is the schedule attached?
Yes,
Yes.
it's 13B.
And I think we just traditionally have as approved the schedule. Is there a motion?
So,
Well, yeah, all I said was say that. So there's been a motion second to approve the 2013 schedule. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And then there was a question of whether at least the two of y'all that were here were planning on running again. I think they note that.
yeah, the incumbent, if they want to
I
continue.
plan on running another term.
We plan on running until we consolidate here in just a few months.
Put them down for another 5 years. Okay.
I don't know about Rusty, but I think Rusty is having
Yeah,
some issues on
to
his
get free. He
new
said,
employment on like meetings, so he may or may not.
said he's probably not going to. But
Where's he go? Where did he go?
he works for Judge,
Moody.
is it Moody?
Jay Moody.
Just like old Ronnie did.
That's right.
Does his position have to be an active officer?
No, they're all considered retired, everything.
Bruce, I have one thing.
Okay.
Thelma Anderson is a spouse that we've been paying. We ask for the widow's affidavits every year. We have still not received hers from last year. We do those in about September or October, and we've been trying. So in December, we did hold her check. So we still have December, January, and February's checks locked up. We have been in contact with
Where
her
does she live?
granddaughter. I think she's in a nursing home now. So, and I'm sure she has not remarried. They say she has not. I'm sure that's probably the truth. But we don't have that formal paper. Nobody has power of attorney or guardianship or anything. There's squabbles between the family, apparently, about who's going to get guardianship. We've talked with the granddaughter and the son. He's in Seattle. The son's in Seattle, the granddaughter's here. And she's in So we don't know what to do.
Where do we have been mailing the checks to? What, to
Her personal, home.
The attorney's here, but I don't see how we can do anything but hold it up. I mean, we have to.
Do we get, I mean, you said been in contact with the granddaughter?
The granddaughter who has lived with her for a long time and been her main caretaker.
Is she able to sign if the granddaughter takes something to her? Can she sign?
And she says no, she can't. And last year, whenever we did get it, it was very shaky, and it was when she signed. So I don't know what her mental status is or anything like that, but.
And is this the one that she said she was going to get a guardianship on?
Yes, and she's.
I tried to contact her, the attorney.
Yeah.
She said she was using to get the guardianship established, but he never returned my call. So I don't know if that means
Well,
he's not his client. Or,
yeah, and it's very hard to get even the granddaughter to return her calls. I had to call like 4 or 5 times before I finally got her to return my call.
Shouldn't someone make a visit to her?
I was gonna say, if you get the information, I will see if I can go visit with her, see what her state
Okay.
is, and see if she can sign, and I'll bring it back to the board. That's a good
Okay.
idea.
Because, I mean, the granddaughter said,
Are they local?
yeah, the son told me that she's in a nursing home in North Little Rock. And, but the granddaughter's in Benton.
If you get the information on where she's at, I will take care of it.
Okay.
Anything else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye. 34. You sure you said that right?